So good morning, everybody. Good morning.
Morgon.
I hope everyone had a good night, a good sleep. So let's begin with some meditation to do our best to get our mind into a good state. So we'll do a little bit of mindfulness meditation, then spend some time generating a positive, altruistic motivation for being here and joining this seminar, workshop, whatever you call it. So first of all, check your body. Try to be sitting in a good position for meditation. So a good position means keeping our back straight as much as we can, but at the same time not being tense. Don't hold on to tension in your body. Instead, try to let go of any tension you may have. So try to have your body as relaxed as possible, feeling light, clear, relaxed. And also it's good to not close your eyes completely, but leave them open a little bit. So there's some light coming in. That helps your mind to stay more awake and alert, clear. So start by taking 3 deep breaths. Imagine the breath, the air coming in, filling your body, and then slowly release the breath. And you can imagine that if there is any tension in your body, any physical tension or emotional tension or mental tension, imagine that going out with your breath and then disappearing, becoming non-existent. So do that for 3 breaths, and then continue to breathe in a normal or natural way. Then spend some time doing mindfulness practice. If you already know a practice of mindfulness, you can do that. Otherwise, you can practice mindfulness by observing the breath, being aware of each breath coming in and going out, bringing the mind back to the breath when it wanders away. So we use the breath as a kind of anchor for our mind, just as a ship has an anchor to keep it in one place rather than floating away, disappearing. So we kind of anchor our mind with the breath by being aware of the breath coming in and going out. And at the same time, if there are other thoughts that arise in your mind, thoughts, or if you hear sounds, or you become aware of sensations in your body, just notice those experiences. Don't deny them. Don't pretend they're not there. So be aware of them. But remember that they are impermanent. So actually everything in the mind is impermanent, changing, coming and going. Similar to clouds coming and going in the sky. So thoughts and other experiences come and go in our mind that are not a permanent, fixed part of our mind. Just notice those other experiences, let them go, and return your awareness to your breathing. And you can count your breaths if you find that helpful. Counting in rounds of 5 breaths or 10 breaths. let us spend a few more minutes meditating to generate an altruistic motivation. That means a motivation to be here and participate in this course, not only for our own happiness, for our own well-being, but for the happiness and well-being of others as well. So opening up our mind, expanding our mind, our heart to include others. So one way we can do this is by recognizing how much we are dependent on others. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, all of our happiness in the past, in the present, and in the future comes from others. We are dependent on others for our happiness. So let's look at how that is so. So the basis of our life, of our existence, is this body, this human body. So having this human body means we have a life. We can live in this world, and we can do many things and have many nice experiences. So where does this body come from? Is it something that always existed? So most people can't remember the beginning of their life, but we can know that our life did have a beginning, and it began in our mother's womb, actually. Because the only way a human being can come into existence is inside of a womb. The womb of a woman, a mother. And it comes into existence due to the joining of the two elements, the sperm from our father, the egg from our mother. So each of our parents contributed some substance that became the basis of our life, of our body. And our mother probably, you can say, did much more, because she carried us in her womb for 9 months or longer. And then after we were born, she was probably the main person to take care of us, feeding us, changing our diapers, bathing us, dressing us, holding us, because we needed a lot of love and attention. But our father probably made his contribution as well, taking care of us sometimes. Probably he was the one who went to work to make the money, so that we could have a house and food and go to the doctor when we were sick and so forth. So just spend a few minutes thinking about your parents and how important they are, or they were, to your existence, to your being here in this world, having this body. Another way we are dependent on others is for our education. So right now we're fully grown, we are adults, and we have a certain amount of knowledge and skills with which we can get a job and earn a living, be able to support ourselves, and also make a contribution to society and make ourselves useful for others. So the knowledge that we have, the skills that we have, weren't with us when we were born. When we came into this world, we didn't know anything. So the knowledge that we have now came in dependence on our teachers. Starting from when we were very small and first learning how to read and write and basic maths and history, geography, and so on. So for many, many years, we learned from our teachers and also the people who produced the textbooks that we studied and other educational materials that we used in our education. So think about that. Try to get a sense of the kindness of all those people, our teachers and the other people who make contributions to our education, which means that now we're able to live quite well and function quite well in the world. So, in reality, everything we have, everything we own, everything we use, everything we enjoy, everything that makes our life pleasant, comfortable, happy, comes from others. So, for example, all the food and the drinks that we consume, that we probably enjoy consuming, and also we need to stay alive and healthy, these come from other people, like farmers and all the people in the food industries that make this food available for us. And the clothing we wear, including shoes and hats and jackets, the house or apartment that we live in, and all the things that we have in our house or apartment, our furniture, all the things in our kitchen, the appliances, bedding, books that we read, music we listen to, movies that we watch, and so forth. So all of these things we own. We have our car or bicycle. All of these things are made by other people. Other people worked to produce these things and make these things available for us. And we are also dependent on other people for things like transportation, if we take buses, trains, airplanes, boats, to get from one place to another. The roads we drive on, the electricity that powers our computers and our lights, lighting system and so forth, water that comes out of our taps, gas and so forth. And things like the postal system, the internet, media. All these things that are part of our life come from other people. So if it weren't for other people making those contributions, our life would be quite different. In fact, we would probably have a hard time surviving, even just staying alive, if it weren't for other people. So when we recognize the contributions others make to our happiness and our well-being, this should give rise to a sense of gratitude and appreciation for them. And that in turn gives rise to a sense of wanting to repay their kindness, wanting to do something in return for what we receive from them. So what we can do to repay their kindness is to try to at least be kind to them, to have feelings of kindness and compassion and the wish to help when we can, and feelings of respect and appreciation. We try to have positive attitudes towards others as much as we can, and on top of that, do what we can to help others when they need help. So it's said in Buddhism that the best way we can help others and repay their kindness is by working on ourselves, transforming our mind, meaning decreasing the negative, disturbing, problematic aspects of our mind, like anger and hatred, greed, jealousy, ignorance, and increasing the positive, beneficial aspects of our mind, like love, compassion, wisdom. So working on that gradually until eventually our mind is totally transformed into enlightened mind, the mind of a Buddha. At which point one is able to help others without any limitation. You can help others 24 hours a day with so much energy, so many other positive qualities and abilities, because you don't need to do anything for yourself anymore. You've already taken care of all your own needs. So now you can dedicate yourself to helping others, helping them to fulfill their needs and wishes. So if you're familiar with that idea of becoming enlightened, transforming your mind into enlightened mind, and you feel comfortable with that idea, then you can make that your motivation for being here. You can think, I'm here to learn more about what I need to do to become enlightened, so that I can get closer to enlightenment for the benefit of others. If you're not so familiar with the idea of becoming enlightened, but you still feel inspired by the idea of helping others, then you could think something like, I'm here so that I can learn ways to be more helpful to others as much as I can in my life. Okay, so when you're ready to, you can open your eyes, relax. Okay, so what we're doing this weekend is looking at the subject of emptiness, also known as selflessness, and trying our best to have a better understanding of this subject, and also practical applications of it, how we can use these ideas in our life, rather than just keep them on the intellectual level. So in case there are people who haven't attended the previous sessions, I'll just briefly review what I've talked about so far. So first, on Friday night, I spoke about the importance of emptiness, why this is an important subject for us to study, think about, meditate on. And then I gave an explanation of emptiness, what it is. We sort of jumped right into it. And then starting yesterday morning, I went backwards a bit, because it said that realistically, emptiness is something very profound, very subtle and very profound, and very difficult to understand. And to just jump right into emptiness without any background material or going through previous steps, it's not likely that one would really be able to understand emptiness in that way. So I kind of went back through some of the topics, some of the things one should understand prior to an understanding of emptiness. So I spoke about the Four Noble Truths, the sort of basic teachings of the Buddha. And then we started looking at more coarse levels of emptiness. Because actually when we talk about emptiness or selflessness, there are different forms of emptiness, different forms of selflessness. So that's helpful to know, because sometimes people use the word emptiness, or they use the word selflessness, but there's no guarantee that what they understand by that word is the same as what you understand by that word. So it's always good to check. When someone says emptiness, it's good to check, so what do you mean by emptiness? What is your understanding of emptiness? And you might find out that they have a completely different understanding of emptiness than you do. Okay? So it's good to understand that there are different meanings of the word emptiness, different meanings of the word selflessness. When you're communicating with people, or also when you're reading books, sometimes in books they may use the word emptiness, but if you explore a little bit more, what are they talking about, you might find out that it's something completely different than what you understand about emptiness. So don't assume that everybody who uses the word emptiness has the same meaning, has the same understanding of that. Yeah, I mean that's true with any word. Also enlightenment. A lot of people talk about enlightenment, but what they mean by enlightenment may be completely different than what Buddhism means by enlightenment. Okay, so any word, especially these sort of tricky words that we use in the context of the spiritual path, it's always good to try to check what is meant by that word in a particular context and see if it matches what you understand about it. So even within Buddhism, there are different meanings of the word emptiness or selflessness. Selflessness is a kind of synonym of emptiness. The two can be used interchangeably. Sometimes they say selflessness, sometimes they say emptiness. But still, there are like different levels. There are different levels of emptiness. From a more coarse level, kind of coarse in the sense that it's more obvious, more easy to understand, to more subtle levels of emptiness. So yesterday we looked at a coarse level of emptiness, which is the emptiness of a permanent. There's three kind of qualities or characteristics of this kind of self. A permanent, unitary, independent self. So do you remember what does permanent mean? What's the meaning of permanent?
No change.
Doesn't change. Okay, permanent means it doesn't change. That means it would be a self that never changes. A self or a person that never changes. And then the second one is unitary. The second characteristic, what does that mean? Unitary?
No parts.
Doesn't have any parts. You can't talk about different parts of a person. Yeah? Person is just like one whole, seamless, indivisible thing. And the third is independent. So what is the meaning of independent in this context? Because the word, again, the word independent can mean different things.
Not
Different
dependent
contexts.
on causes and conditions.
Right, it's on your paper. So, right, so in this context, when we talk about a permanent, unitary, independent self, that means a self that doesn't depend on causes and conditions. So that would be like a person who doesn't have to be born from their parents, right? It's just like always existing without having to come from parents or from an egg. Because again, Buddhism, according to Buddhism, a person isn't just a human being, but any living being. So that includes animals and insects, birds, okay? So some persons, some beings come out of eggs, but of course they still have to have a mother and a father. So a person who's independently existing would be a person that is able to exist independently without having to depend on anyone else or anything else. Totally autonomous. So we looked at that idea, the idea of such a self, which some non-Buddhist schools, like in India prior to the Buddhist time, and even today, this kind of view still exists today, there's some non-Buddhist schools who do teach the existence of such a self, or person, or I, or Atman. They use the word Atman. So they say there is such a thing. There is this thing, this person, or self, or Atman, that is permanent, that is unitary, that is independent of causes and conditions. Okay, so they teach that. And people study such a doctrine, meditate on such a doctrine, believe in such a doctrine, and it probably brings some benefit for some people, right? Because actually they say that even the Buddha, when the Buddha was alive and teaching, he would meet different kinds of people, and he had this ability to know the minds of others, and he could see where people were at and what they needed. And he could see that for some people to teach selflessness, to teach emptiness, would be too much for them. They would freak out. They wouldn't be able to handle it. So for people like that, Buddha would teach the existence of a self, because if they believed there was a self, a real self, then they would be motivated to behave well in order to make sure that they don't create suffering for themselves. So then they would avoid creating bad karma and create good karma in order to make sure that, there would be happiness in the future, happiness for themselves in the future. So Buddha could see that some people needed that. They needed teaching on the existence of a self, and Buddha would teach the existence of a self to those people. But that's said to be not the Buddha's real kind of final view. It was more like, they say it's like a doctor. Buddha's like a doctor. So when different people come to a doctor, everybody has a different kind of body, different kind of constitution, different sickness. So the doctor doesn't give the same medicine to everybody. He doesn't give the same treatment to everybody. But a good doctor will check each person's situation and then give medicine or give treatment according to what is best for them, what will work best for them. So the Buddha would do the same in terms of spiritual teachings. He would teach different things to different people according to what would work for them. So it said sometimes the Buddha did teach the existence of a self. I remember hearing the Dalai Lama talk about meeting one Indian man who was completely freaked out about the idea of selflessness. And physically, he was actually shaking when he heard about the idea of no self, he just couldn't handle that. He needed to believe in a self. So that's just an example or an illustration of how different people do have different mentalities and dispositions and characters and so forth. So Buddha would give different teachings. So that's true for us as well. I mean, if we feel freaked out by the idea of no self, if we find that just, I can't handle that, that doesn't work for me, then, you know, that kind of teaching on selflessness may not be right for you, at least at this point in time. It's always possible that we change. You know, people change. So maybe later, the teaching on selflessness, teaching on emptiness might be okay for us. But if we find it too much, and it doesn't seem to be a beneficial thing for us, then we don't have to follow that for now. Okay, so yesterday we looked at this idea of the absence, which the Buddha taught. The Buddha did teach to most people, except for those who couldn't handle it. The Buddha did teach to most people that there is no such thing as a permanent, unitary, independent self. And in fact, he said that if you believe in a permanent, unitary, independent self, that belief is going to keep you in samsara. You know, that will not enable you to get out of the whole cycle of death and rebirth and suffering and problems. So if you really want to be free of the cycle of samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth and suffering, then you need to let go of such a belief. But again, the Buddha said, you shouldn't just believe what I'm saying, but you check it out for yourself. So this is our responsibility. Our responsibility is to investigate for ourselves this idea of the self. What is the self? What is the person? You know, how does it exist and how does it not exist? So come to a clear understanding in our own experience of what the self is and what it isn't. So we shouldn't just say, well, Buddha said there's no permanent, unitary, independent self, so it must be true. Yeah, I believe that. That's not the way to go. And that's not going to work either, because that's just coming out of your mouth. You're just saying those words, but you don't really understand what they mean. You haven't really gone through the process of investigating that and checking if that's true or not. So this is what we should do. We should check to see if what the Buddha says is true or not. Is there a permanent self? Is the self something permanent and unitary and independent? So we did a little bit of meditation on that yesterday, but because our time is limited, we don't have a whole lot of time to devote to this. And then I just briefly talked about, okay, so that's the permanent, unitary, independent self is a kind of, from the Buddhist point of view, a false self. Something that doesn't exist. Something that's kind of just a creation of the mind. Creation of the mind, but doesn't exist in reality. That's the Buddhist point of view, but again, we have to investigate that for ourselves. So that's one type of self that doesn't exist, and it's the most coarse or gross or obvious kind of false self. And then I spoke about a somewhat more subtle type of self, which according to Buddhism doesn't exist, but we have to investigate that for ourselves. And that is called, if you have your paper, on page 2, near the top, number 5, it says, a more subtle level of selflessness is the emptiness of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. So that's a mouthful of words that probably don't mean much to you. But one way of explaining this kind of self is that it seems to be like a boss or a controller or a ruler. You know, a sense of an I, a self, a me, who's in charge, who's controlling our own body and mind, and also can also extend to other people. We try to control other people, we try to control the environment and so forth. So it's like the controller or the boss. And this is said to be an innate conception. We have an innate conception, meaning innate means everybody has it. It's inborn. We're born with it. So we don't have to be taught such an idea by our parents or teachers or anybody else. We're born with it. So even babies, small babies, have this sense of a self, of an I, who's like somewhere inside and controlling everything. Even animals have it. Okay, so all living beings have this in an innate or natural, instinctive way. But it's also possible that there could be certain philosophical systems, religious systems, that reinforce this innate sense of such a self. And like they teach us, yes, you do exist that way. There is such a self existing in that way. And so then that would further strengthen this conception that we already have, naturally, spontaneously. Yeah.
Is it possible that that is in fact like a mental factor, like vigilance or something, that then one projects on top of that is actually me?
Well, you mean like we were talking about yesterday, the mental factor vigilance that watches the body, the mind, and so on. But that is something that exists. The mental factor vigilance exists, and
project
it's
on top
valid.
of that, like that is actually the boss.
I think it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
I think it's something much deeper and much more instinctive than that. Because the mental factor vigilance mainly comes up when we're paying attention to our own mind and paying attention to other things as well. So I think even when people are not necessarily paying attention, practicing mindfulness and paying attention, they can still have this strong sense of a I who is the boss, the controller.
Like I must get it together or something, or you must.
Yeah.
I really recognize
I think it's something,
this self.
yeah, I think it's something really, really deep, really, really intrinsic, really much part of us. That's how I understand it.
When I didn't study much psychology, but only in high school, and then they said with Freud that it was like the over-I. And I think when you talk about it, it sounds like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything almost about Freud, but there was this I who was like a little bit more.
Super ego.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's
ego?
the right word.
Yeah.
But something like that. Just try to do the right thing and control it. And I don't know if it's something like that.
Yeah.
But that perhaps then enhanced, like you said, with the.
Yeah, I haven't studied psychology either, but yeah, if there's a system like Freud's system that actually teaches the existence of such a self, the superego, and then people believe that, they think, yes, I do have such a self.
I experienced it myself.
Yeah, I feel it, and it's true. Freud said so. Therefore, it must be true. So then, yeah, that would be an example of the innate sense of a controlling I being reinforced by some teachings that you receive.
But in fact, this is saying that is just a projection. It just seems like, but there is nothing like that.
According to Buddhism.
Yeah.
This is Buddha's own experience, and he's inviting us, asking us to check it out for ourselves, to see if such an I does exist or doesn't exist.
I think for me it's a little difficult because I kind of have this experience, but I guess then one has to question and what is that experience, or where is it, or something.
Yeah, we're going to do a meditation. I'm just trying to go back, for the benefit of people who weren't here yesterday, just to briefly cover what we talked about, so you're not totally lost. And then we'll do a meditation on it. Yeah.
I think many philosophies, there's this observer self, like the owner of thoughts, the thinker of thoughts. So would this be that, you think?
Could be.
I mean, since there is thoughts, there must be a thinker. So,
Mhm.
you know, the observer.
Yeah, actually I was wondering, because I haven't, I started studying Buddhism when I was quite young, and I haven't had the time to study much other systems. I mean, Buddhism itself is so much to study. So I'm not very familiar with Western philosophy or science or psychology and so forth. So I'm actually wondering if any of you know, in the Western systems of thought, are there explanations of what is the self, what is the person?
Yeah, I think so. But I guess it makes sense if you think all those explanations are maybe what we would say here, on the relative truth. I mean, our kind of self on the relative truth. That's a way to see it, I think. I mean, here in Buddhism, I think what we are trying to do is to go deeper into the subject, but on the conventional level, we can say we have the self, can't we? On a conventional level, but not
Yes.
the ultimate. The ultimate truth is something else, but conventional
Yes.
level.
Yeah, we do have a self-convention.
Yeah.
Buddha didn't deny that.
So I think, yeah.
Yeah, although I've heard that some Buddhist schools do deny the existence of a conventional self. They do say that there is no self at all, full stop.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this is a controversy within Buddhism. Within Buddhism there are different points of view, but Lama Tsong Khapa, who we follow, he actually kind of studied a lot of different Buddhist thinkers, and he said that it's wrong to say there is no conventional self. That is incorrect, because there is a self who, for example, has been in samsara up until now, dying and being reborn, creating karma, experiencing the results of karma, thinking, feeling, eating, working, sleeping, practicing meditation, and eventually will reach enlightenment. There is a conventionally existent self, so it's wrong to say that there's no conventional self. But some, I don't know, apparently there are some who say that. So, yes, there is a conventionally existent self, but we have to understand what that is. Like yesterday I was saying that there's a self that does exist conventionally, right? There is a self that does exist, but to understand what is the self that exists, what is its nature, what is its characteristics, we have to first go through and eliminate the false selves, the wrong understanding of selves, before we can understand what does exist. So it's like we have to first refute what doesn't exist before we can understand what does exist. So that's what I'm trying to do, is going through the different possible kinds of self that could exist, and realizing that, yeah, those are actually unrealistic. A self couldn't exist in those ways. So this is the process of understanding emptiness. You have to refute or negate or realize as wrong certain concepts about the self before you can understand how the self does exist. What is the actual way that our self, our I, our person, the person we are, how it does exist.
I would say that in the West, we would say that we have a body, and the body creates the mind, and the mind develops all through life as we accumulate more and more memories stocked in first the hippocampus and then the cortex. And so this is very interesting because, in fact, in this Western conception, it's also impermanent, because first we have a few memories and we're always changing and changing, getting more memories. So there is no impermanence. Permanence. And so this, in fact, should help Westerners to understand that the idea of something permanent is wrong, because we constantly have new memories stuffed into this, and the mind develops.
Yeah, yeah. I saw an article in National Geographic some years ago about the brain, and they had actual photographs of a brain, And they were telling the story of a woman who was having a brain operation because of some, I can't remember what it was, something wrong with her brain, so she needed to be operated on. And to me it was very interesting because the way they were talking about her brain was, that was her. You know, they actually said, this is her. I can't remember what her name was, but, you know, kind of indicating the brain is her. So I think that is a common conception in the West, that we are our brain. Yeah? Does anyone here think that way? Do you think I am my brain? Well, some people do. Some people think we're the brain. That's who we are. And there was a film called What the Bleep Do We Know? That was the English title. Did you see that? Yeah. And I remember in that film, because they had interviews with different scientists and philosophers, psychologists and so on, and there was one scientist, I don't know if he was a physicist or not, but he was talking about how in the past there used to be the belief that there was some part of the brain which was the controller of everything. I don't remember the term he used, but kind of the headquarters, the central control for the whole body. They had that belief or that theory, and then they were investigating the brain to try to find that part, and they weren't able to find it. Is that right? Did I get it right? And they've kind of given up?
Yeah.
But that seems to be a similar idea here, that somewhere within us there's a controller, one thing which controls our body and our mind, everything else. So that seems to be similar to this idea of a self, who is the controller, the boss.
Because those scientists maybe had the feeling like everyone else, there is something there, and then
Right.
they went with that.
Yeah. I mean, it does kind of make sense. You feel like there's got to be somebody in charge, somebody or something running all of this, you know? I mean, it's just like in the world, you know, you have a company, and there's people who run the company. If there's nobody in charge, then it would be chaos. So it seems like there has to be somebody in charge.
But also I mean, in the West, it's either you are the brain or you have a soul. Like it's, I mean, so there is nothing. They don't know what conscious is, or like it's very difficult because something that is not physical. It's either you think you have a soul, and then that's something non-physical, or you think you have only the physical matter. So it's. Do you understand what I mean? So it's either or. You can't really.
Yeah.
And then if you have a soul, you have the control, that kind of thing. So, but it's an area of research where people, I mean, consciousness is very, they don't know, like there is no conclusion, there's no Western conclusion yet at all. But that something is not physical, but interacting with the physical world is very difficult for scientists to.
Yeah.
So that's why you end up with sort of the soul and the whole package sort of thing.
Yeah. Have you heard of Ian Stevenson?
I have
Ian Stevenson. He's an American professor. I think he was a doctor and a psychiatrist, and he worked at the University of Virginia. And his life work, I think he spent like 50 years working on this, was to collect what he calls cases suggestive of reincarnation. There's a few books. He has thousands. And his work is being carried on. He died a few years ago, but there's some other professors who are carrying on his work. I think some people think he's a nut. Yeah, apparently he's out there somewhere. But to me it seems like he's quite serious. He's traveled around the world and investigated cases. Usually it's children, young children, who talk about a previous life and are able to give a lot of information about this previous life. And it's very difficult to come up with an explanation of how these children have this knowledge, because their parents don't know, you know, they don't know who this person was. They have no knowledge. Nobody, the neighbors, nobody around the child knows about that person. And yet the child is talking, giving all this information in first person I. You know, they're saying, I did this, I did that, I had this wife, I had that child, and so on. So he has all these... but I read one article about him and his work, and it said that he was not able to explain how this works, how a child in one life is able to have this knowledge. Because coming from the Western point of view, the mind, the consciousness is dependent on the brain. They can't accept or they can't believe that there could be something separate from the brain. So how does the information in one person's brain get into another person's brain? So they said this is a kind of flaw in his work, that he couldn't explain that. So from the Buddhist point of view, it's no problem. No problem, because it's the mind that goes from one life to another that is able to retain memories of experiences in one life into another life. No problem. But anyway, this is still a problem in the West.
I also saw some documentary or something like that about just that. I think it was the same person you were talking about, that often small children remember things from the previous lives, but when they tell it, they don't take them seriously. So he had sent out a message that people, please contact me if your child says something strange about what he had done before and so on. And he followed up some of them, and it seemed really realistic. For instance, a young little boy talked about what he has been doing before, he knew the place, everything. And they visited the family that he was supposed to have been, and it came up that their son had died in a motorcycle accident at the age of 18 or whatever. And it could be that person. They were, I think even the family thought it was their son from before. So it's really interesting. And also I remember the Dalai Lama, he used to have those conferences with scientists, and then they were bringing up, they were talking about transplantation of organs, and then they discussed about if it was possible to take a brain from one person to the other. Who should that person be? Should it be the former one, or should it be the new body? And His Holiness said, absolutely, it should be the new one. You know, that who received that brain. It should still be him.
Yeah, because according to Buddhism, the center of the mind is here.
Yes.
It's here, not in the brain.
Yeah. So I have to go back to this and follow the discussion more and see what the others really said about it.
Anyway, let's. I wanted to do a meditation this morning. I didn't want to get into a big discussion right now, but so yesterday I just introduced this concept of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, but we didn't have time to meditate on it. So I thought to do that this morning. So before we get too kind of carried away with other things. But let me just explain one thing, because there's one thing I didn't explain yesterday. If you look at the paper, so this type of self, I'm under point 5, is called a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. And I didn't completely explain those terms. So the term self-sufficient means that it's somewhat independent of the aggregates, in the sense that, like I said, the analogy is like the head salesman and the other salesman. Okay, so they're all salesmen, they're all kind of doing the same work, but there's still one who's kind of the boss, who's in charge of the others and tells the others what to do. So that's an analogy for the way this self appears in relation to the aggregates, the 5 aggregates, our body and mind. So the self doesn't appear to be something totally outside or totally separate from the aggregates, the body and mind. It seems to be somehow within, like in the same office, but still a little bit separate in the sense of being the boss, the one in charge. And there's one or at least maybe some Buddhist teachers who say that this sense of self can give rise to certain thoughts, certain experiences that we might have. For example, the idea, I would like to have that person's body. Yeah? Have you ever thought that way? If you see somebody with a really great-looking body, and you think your body isn't so great-looking, then you might have this thought, oh, how nice if I could have that person's body, right? So that kind of thought means you do have a sense of yourself, your I, being separate from your body. Like you could throw away this body, take over that body. So it's the same I. It's a little like we were just talking about with the brain, the same sense of I, but in a different body. And we might have the same thought with somebody else's mind. Like if you meet somebody who's just brilliant, genius, so intelligent, so, God, they can just know everything, and they can be very clear, or a very happy mind, very positive, happy mind, and you might think, wow, I wish I could have that person's mind. Okay, so again, there's a sense that your I is somewhat separate from your mind, and you could trade in, this old mind that you don't like very much with somebody else's mind. Yeah? So that's just a kind of illustration of how this conception of the I works. It does seem to be somewhat separate from our body and mind. So that's the meaning of self-sufficient. Then, the other term used here is substantially existent. And substantially existent, this is a kind of, it's terminology used in Buddhism. It may have already been existent before Buddhism, because like I say, there were these Indian philosophies, pre-Buddhist philosophies that had they had incredible explanations of things as well. They had, a whole explanation of the world and beings and nirvana and karma and previous lives and so on. So they had incredible explanations. So they were already doing a lot of analysis into things, and they may have already had this term. Okay, so substantially existent, there's two terms. Maybe I'll use Gun's board, since Gun went to all the trouble of bringing this board here. I should make some use of it. So the meaning of substantially existent means something is substantially existent if, when we perceive it, it can appear kind of directly to us without other things having to appear. Now, it doesn't make much sense, but let me... An example would be a tree. So when we see a tree, we can just see the tree. The tree appears directly to us. It's not necessary to look at other things or see other things first in order to see a tree. Right? We can just see directly a tree. Now, as opposed to that, we have some things which are called imputedly existent. And this is the opposite, in the sense that for this kind of thing to appear to us, other things have to appear, which are not it. So, an example is a forest. Now, how do we see a forest? How does a forest appear to us?
Lots of trees.
Right. To see a forest, we have to see trees. if there were no trees, we wouldn't see a forest.
But
let me carry on. Okay. So now a forest. What is a forest anyway?
lots of trees.
It's something that's imputed or named onto a collection of trees. Okay, so you have a collection of trees, a certain number of trees. I don't know the official number of trees you have to have before you can call it a forest. Probably 2 or 3 trees wouldn't qualify. Usually have to have a lot of trees. So there's a lot of trees there in the ground. They have to be standing up. If they were all cut down, you probably wouldn't call it a forest anymore, right? So they have to be live and standing up. So you have a bunch of trees, and then we give the name forest to that. We call that a forest. Okay, so to see a forest, we have to see trees. Whereas to see a tree, we can just see the tree directly. Does that make sense? I know it's debatable.
Because
actually
if
the
you have the
Prasangikas don't-
trunk
You have
and
to see
the
the
branches
branches,
and
yeah.
the leaves.
Exactly. Okay. So this is a very good point. Now, within the Buddhist schools, other than the Prasangika, the Madhyamika Prasangika, this is what they would say. They would say that a tree is substantially existent. But the Prasangikas say, no. You can't see a tree without seeing other things. The branches, the trunk, the leaves. So they say even a tree is imputedly existing. They say nothing is substantially existent. Everything is imputedly existent. But the other Buddhist schools, besides Prasangika, they still say there are things which are substantially existent. So, now, another example of these two aggregates. So remember yesterday we talked about the 5 aggregates. So a set of aggregates, like each of us has a set of aggregates. This is considered substantially existent. Now this is also a bit strange, I find, because of the aggregates, we can only really see the body, the form aggregate. Although it is possible, they do say it's possible to see somebody else's mental aggregates if you have clairvoyance. So if you're a clairvoyant, you can see somebody else's mind, their thoughts, their feelings, and so forth. So it is possible to see somebody else's mental aggregates, but most of us can only see the body aggregates. But still, it is said that the aggregates, a set of aggregates can appear to us directly. So they are substantially existent, whereas a person is imputedly existent, because in order to see a person, we have to see aggregates. How do we see a person? How does a person appear to us?
Body.
Can a person appear to us without aggregates appearing? No. Okay. So similar with a forest. A forest can't appear to us without trees appearing. So that's imputedly existent. So, person and forest have that in common. To see a person, we have to see aggregates. We have to see something else that is not the person. Whereas the aggregates themselves, according to the schools other than Prasangika, they're substantially existent because they can appear directly to us. You walk, just like right now, you can look around this room and see all these persons. Well, sorry, you can see all these aggregates. What we actually see are the person's aggregates, mainly their body. Unless you happen to be clairvoyant, you can see the person's thoughts, feelings, what's going on in their mind, but otherwise we see their body aggregate, their physical aggregate. Does that make sense? Because, so what we're looking at here is the possibility of a person being substantially existent. Is a person substantially existent? If a person was substantially existent, then we would be able to see a person without having to see their aggregates. Right? You could see a person without having to see a body aggregate, mental aggregates, a set of aggregates. Was that possible? Like here in this chair. In this chair, there's no set of aggregates. So is there a person there?
Unless it's a kind of formless person.
But a formless person still has aggregates. A formless person has the four mental aggregates.
But if we are not clairvoyant.
But if you were clairvoyant, or if you were a Buddha could see they're probably formless beings here in this room. We just don't see them. They don't take up any space. So it could be a formless being there in that chair.
We don't even see all the beings with forms, like small insects and things.
In our
They
body.
have form, but we don't see them.
That's true. That's true. Microscopic sentient beings. So anyway, I wanted to explain that before we go into the meditation, because in the meditation we're going to examine, we're going to check to see if it is possible that our I, the self, the person, who we are, is something that can be substantially existent in the sense that we would be able to see it, to perceive it, to be aware of it, somewhat separate from our bodies and our minds. You know, like our body and our mind could be here in this chair, and our self could be somewhere else. So let's try that anyway. So make yourselves comfortable. Try to keep your back straight. Also try to keep your eyes open a little bit to prevent sleepiness, drowsiness, starting to snore. That would be disturbing to people around you, so good to try to stay awake during the meditation. And relax your body as much as you can. Also relax your mind in the sense of letting go of thoughts that aren't related to the meditation that we're doing. So if you're thinking about some past experience or some plans you have for what you're going to do later, some phone call you want to make, whatever. So put aside those thoughts and do your best to keep your mind right here in the present place, present moment, and as much as possible concentrated on the meditation that we're doing. So let's start by trying to get in touch with or trying to observe the sense of I that we have that seems to be like a controller, an owner of our body and mind. So, for example, when we have a thought or even an expression, we say, my body, or my arm, or my eyes. So there is a sense of an I, who is the owner of the body, the arm, the eyes. Something inside of us that's like the owner and the controller of our body. So this is probably something very, very subtle and also probably somewhat sneaky. In other words, difficult to catch hold of. But just try. Try to recognize, catch hold of that sense of the I, as in my body, my eyes, and so forth. And then if you are able to catch a glimpse of this I, try to analyze it more carefully. Try to recognize how it appears. How does it seem to exist? Does it seem to be something that's just imputedly existent? Like the example we gave of a forest. We just give the name or the label forest onto a bunch of trees, but the forest itself isn't something that we can directly see without seeing trees. We can't take away all the trees and still see a forest. That's the meaning of imputedly existent. So does our I seem to exist like that? Like it's just something that's imputed to our body and mind, our aggregates? Or does it seem to be something that exists substantially? Substantially existent, meaning that it can appear on its own. It can stand on its own, appear on its own, even if we take away the body and the mind. So in case you think that it is something substantially existent, if it appears that it exists on its own and it can appear on its own without the appearance of our body and mind, if that was true, then we should be able to find it. We should be able to point to something and say, that is it, right there. So see if you can do that. See if you can find something within you, within your aggregates, within your body and mind, something you can point to. Something that exists in a very real, solid way on its own. Something you can point to and say, that there is the I, the boss, the controller. So in case we do manage to find some part of us that we think is that I, the boss, the controller, it's substantially existent, and if it seems to be some part of our body, like our brain, you think it's the brain, or you think it's part of the brain, or maybe you think it's the heart, the organ, heart. So just in case you have that idea, then ask yourself, what about when we have a kind of thought or feeling, I'm attractive, I'm good looking. Or if we think, I'm not attractive, I'm not good looking. So when we have that kind of thought, that kind of sense of I, the kind of image of ourself, our eyes, are we talking about that part of our body, like the brain? Are we saying, my brain is attractive, or it's not very attractive? Or in another situation, let's say we're eating a meal, sitting at a table eating a meal, and we get a phone call from a friend, and the friend says, hey, what are you doing? And we say, oh, I'm eating. So when we say, I am eating, the I who is eating, is it that part of the body, the brain? Does the brain eat? Or the heart? Does the heart eat? The heart chew on food and swallow it? But we can do a similar investigation if we think the I is not part of the body, but is instead part of our mind, part of our mental or conscious experiences. For example, we might think the I is the thinker, the one who's thinking all the time. Or we might think the I is the feeler, the one who feels emotions, who gets really excited or happy, or really unhappy or angry. So if you do think the I is the mind, or part of the mind, some part of your mental experiences, then you can do the same investigation, like when we look in the mirror and we have thoughts about ourself. You know, I look pretty good today, or I don't look good today, or I need to shave, or I need a haircut. So when we have those kinds of thoughts in our mind, those kinds of experiences about our I, are we talking about our mind, our mental experiences that need a shave, or that need a haircut, that need to have some more makeup? And also, if this I was something substantially existent, that means it would be able to exist somewhat separate from the body and the mind. Just like in a real estate office, the boss could fire all the other real estate agents and continue working on his own or her own. So, is that true with our sense of self, our sense of I? Would our I be able to carry on existing if we got rid of our body and our mind? All our aggregates, mental and physical aggregates, could they be somehow discarded, separated from, and the I, the boss, would be able to exist on its own? If you do think that is possible, then ask yourself, what is that I? What kind of phenomena is it? It's not some part of the body, it's not some part of the mind. What exactly is it? So now when you're ready, you can slowly come out of the meditation, open your eyes. So that's just to give you some idea about how we can at least start investigating the idea of an I existing as a kind of boss, controller, ruler, and in a somewhat independent way to our aggregates, like in charge of the aggregates, but be able to sort of exist by itself. So if you found that difficult or confusing, don't be surprised. It is a difficult, especially if it's the first time you've never done this before. Yeah, it's really not at all easy. So realistically, this is, it's like a process. We have to think again and again and check again and again our experiences, and it's also very helpful to study, read works by the great masters of the past and listen to teachings by various teachers and increase our knowledge, our understanding of this topic. But at the same time then be observing our own experience, working with our own experience. Because like I say, it's not enough just to say, oh, the Buddha said there's no such thing as a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. I agree. Yes, it's true. It's true. So that's not going to make any kind of change in our experience, because we will most probably still have this instinctive, intuitive, inborn grasping at such a self, and still acting as if we have such a self. So, so the most important thing is to check our experience. And I think realistically it's a long process. Even to be able to identify, even to be able to get a sense of that sense of self. Then once we do have a sense of it, once we have kind of identified, oh, that's this kind of self that appears in my experience, then to use reasoning, to use a sort of investigative process to check if it's true or not, if it really exists or not. So, how about if we have a break, short break? Try to make it 10 minutes or so, because then it's almost lunchtime, so we don't need a long break right now. We'll have a longer break at lunch. Okay. Thank you. A lot more time talking about each of these levels of selflessness or emptiness, but we don't have that much time. So I've got to move on now to the most subtle level of selflessness or emptiness. Just trying to move it and I don't. So on the paper that you have, number 6, is this type of selflessness or emptiness. This is the one I was talking about on Friday night. And this is called emptiness of an inherently existent self. But there are lots of other kind of synonyms for inherent existence, such as true existence, independent existence, objective existence. In Jeffrey Hopkins' book I mentioned yesterday, called Meditation on Emptiness, he has one whole page in that book. He has a list of all the different synonyms that are used in different texts for this type of emptiness. But anyway, we don't need to go into that. The most important thing is to understand what this means. What does it mean? It's the meaning of an inherently existent self. So inherently existent means existing from its own side, independent of anything else. So it is said that, as with the previous sense of self, the self-sufficient, substantially existent self, which I said is innate or instinctive, like everybody has it, we're born with it. So this one is also innate, instinctive. We are born with this. In fact, according to Buddhism, it's been with us from beginningless time. A long time. So that means within our mind, within the continuation of consciousness, which has been going from beginningless time and is still there with us now, within that there has always been this conception of an inherently existing self, or inherently existing I. So we don't have to be taught this conception. It doesn't come from our parents, our teachers, or our society, our education system. We're born with it. And this is said to be the most deep, the most subtle form of a sense of I, a sense of self, deeper than the others. And so this conception, so there is this conception, this aspect of the mind. We all have it. And the way it works is that it sees a self or an I as something that's existing all on its own, autonomous, independent of anything and everything else. Like almost, the way I think of it is, it's like it's coming from its own side and saying, I am real, I exist, I am here, without any doubt at all. You know, I am very much here. So it seems to be existing in that way. And I think it's actually somewhat difficult to distinguish this sense of self from the previous one. Mm-hmm. They're quite similar, and I mentioned yesterday that this sense of a self, the inherently existing self, is said to be kind of deeper and more fundamental or more basic than the other one. So, like, this one is underneath the other one. So, like, the very root of our experience, there is the sense of an inherently existent self. Then on top of that, as a kind of outgrowth of that, or an addition to that, there's a sense of a self as a boss, a controller, I who's in charge of everything. So that one is sort of built on top of the deeper one. But what I read in Jeffrey Hopkins' book, not Meditation on Emptiness, but Emptiness Yoga, he says that when people are trying to identify this false sense of self, then it's difficult to know, even if they do have an experience of identifying, like they manage to catch hold of or catch a glimpse of a sense of self, it's difficult to know if it's the more gross one, the self-sufficient, substantially existent self, or the subtler one, the inherently existent self. They're very hard to distinguish. They're very similar. They said there is a way to know if you manage to get the coarser one or the subtler one. And he says that, and this is also confirmed by the teachings, because with the coarser one, the self-sufficient, substantially existent self, we have that conception only with regard to persons. Persons, like